level attentional skill is to be able to selectively attend to things. And that measures our capacity to be able to attend to things that aren't the most interesting or dominant things that are happening at the time. So if you think about a child in a classroom who's got all kinds of interesting things happening in their head, there's something fun happening outside the window, the kid next to them is doing something amusing, even in those circumstances, at least some kids are able to pay attention to what the teacher's saying, which is much less interesting and engaging than all of those other things. And how do they do that? Because they're practicing selective attention. Selective attention is the valuable skill from the point of view of attention in terms of learning in a classroom environment. And therefore it's something that is very positive in that environment. But if you're very good at selective attention in the jungle, and that means that you're taking a very close look at a flower while there's a saber-toothed tiger behind you, it's not going to be good for your survival. You're going to get eaten. And so when we look at children's attentional capacity in the classroom, we need to ask ourselves, is this child feeling safe? Because if they are feeling safe in the classroom, and we'd like all children to feel safe in the classroom, but unfortunately not all of them do, then selective attention is the appropriate strategy. But if the young person is feeling frightened or distressed or worried about something, then selective attention is not what you need. It's constant vigilance, looking from all angles to see where the threat's coming from next. So if we think about the second boy, the one with who might be labelled with depression, who's preoccupied with his previous traumatic experiences, he doesn't feel safe in the classroom. He is subject to, with little reminders, to be thrown back into the detention centre where he saw violent acts being perpetrated, and to be overwhelmed by the distress that goes with that. And you can't expect him to pay attention in class under those circumstances. Just coming back to the notion of communicating the predicament, there are only a limited number of ways in which boys can tell us that things aren't right in their life. One of them is in words. It's great when somebody can say to me, look, my parents bicker all the time and I can't bear it, and it's giving me a gutsache. But that doesn't happen very often. Usually my task is to try to decode the communication, and it'd be interesting to see whether this is in sympathy with or against what you were saying before, Miles, because in my view there is value for an adult, whether it's a teacher, a parent or a therapist, to be able to put into words something that the boy himself is not putting into words. And, so really the four little vignettes that I've described really almost exhaust the number of ways in which kids can tell us that something's wrong in their life. And we can put labels on those things relatively easily. And I could probably sort just about every patient I see into one of those four categories. By just looking with my searchlight for those things that I know go to constitute those diagnoses, to go through the tick list of the 15 things you need to get a diagnosis of ADHD, or the 9 things that you need to get a diagnosis of depression. What I want to argue is that the really interesting information that we're going to find out about somebody is in the shadows, and just collecting information about symptoms isn't going to actually illuminate things. If we search with our spotlight, we can sort people into categories, we can make diagnoses. If we lurk in the shadows, we get people's stories. And the capacity to get boys to tell stories, I think, is something that is an absolute educational priority. Just to digress for a moment, one of the things that I worry about in our attempt to make schools into more emotionally positive environments are programs like Mind Matters, which go into schools to teach kids about mental health and to add mental health or emotional well-being to the curriculum. Now, in my view, the educational curriculum is exactly what children need in order to become emotionally more healthy. The same kind of skills that we attempt to facilitate the development of in educating children, enhancing their imagination, helping them to understand and make sense of experience and be able to tell stories, make sense of stories, learn about different genres of narrative and recount and so on. These skills are just exactly what we need in order to be resilient from a mental health and emotional well-being point of view. And so what we should be investing in terms of strengthening the capacity of schools to strengthen children is making better schools, not making hospitals out of schools. And I'll come back to talk about that because people much more knowledgeable than me have said roughly the same thing. If I go into my assessment of these four boys that I've told you about, looking for what's common, all I'll find is that list of symptoms that the Woman's Weekly could just as well find for me. What informs me is what's different about the different individuals that I see. So let me give you an example. We see most of the kids in South Australia who attempt suicide come to our hospital. And amongst girls who attempt suicide, the most common reason is that they've broken up with their boyfriend. And we never accept that as an explanation for why somebody's attempted suicide, just because hundreds of girls break up with their boyfriend every day. And so there must be something more going on. Now, if we think about two girls who present on a given day, having taken an overdose, both saying that they've broken up with their boyfriend, both presenting similar symptoms of moderately severe depression, both having taken a reasonably dangerous overdose. By recognising those common features for those two girls, I'm nowhere along the path of learning how to manage and work with them. It's not until I begin to understand what's different and unique to that individual. So if in the process of talking to one of the girls I discover that her father and mother divorced when she was 2, that her father disappeared from her life for 7 or 8 years, that he then recontacted her when she was about 10 or 11, that she was very wary of him, but they gradually built a relationship. And then about 6 months ago, he got moved interstate on business. And at about this time, she formed her first serious relationship with a boy. And then now the boy's dropped her. Then suddenly it all makes sense. We can understand why this particular girl has become suicidal after the ordinary developmental experience of breaking up with a boyfriend. And I think I've already sort of laboured this point that what we need to do is stop thinking about the way in which young people present to us as dysfunctional and to see it as adaptive. That doesn't mean it works. That doesn't mean that an outside person looking at the behaviour would judge this to be appropriate behaviour or in the child's best interest. The boy with the language disorder who's playing the class clown, that's not in his best interest educationally or otherwise. But it's his adaptation, it's his best attempt to make things work for himself. We associate, through kind of boys do conform to gender stereotypes, and they give us more anger than they give us of the feelings along the bottom of that triangle. And so I want to say a little bit about that. I want to talk about how confused young people can get about their feelings. That's not very controversial. But here I'm not talking about conflicts about identity or other cognitive confusion. I'm talking about confusion on a more or less somatic level. What am I actually feeling at the moment? What is my gut feeling? And people get that wrong. So if you just reflect on yourself for a moment and think about your own management of anger, fear and sadness, you probably will concede that at least that one of those feelings is a bit more difficult for you than the others. Either you're not as comfortable with it in yourself, or you don't like to see it in other people, or you come from a cultural background where it's a bit unacceptable or something like that. And here I'm particularly talking about anger, fear and sadness. I add shame, particularly in the setting of the medical setting, both mental illness and physical illness, because shame is an emotion that boys often carry if they've got some kind of medical or some kind of physical or mental impairment. If you as sophisticated adults sometimes don't feel comfortable in one of those areas, you can bet that most kids aren't completely comfortable or fluent or aware of those three feelings. And what happens a lot with boys is that anger becomes the substitute for other feelings. The softer feelings at the bottom get held down and anger comes out as being acceptable. And so, for example, I might see somebody from a very abusive background who's had an objectively frightening childhood, who tells me, when asked, what sort of things make you frightened? Nothing. I don't know what it's like to feel scared. And so what you see sometimes in such young people is panic, but panic that manifests itself with aggressive behaviour. The person gets anxious, they misinterpret the arousal that comes with that as rage, and they enact that rage. As clinicians, as teachers, as parents, on average, we're better at responding to people who manifest the softer feelings on the bottom of the triangle rather than those who come at us in an angry fashion. And so part of our work as adults in dealing with potentially angry young people is to be able to translate anger into other feelings, or to make sense of anger in a slightly different way. And so from this point of view, I think that it's important to distinguish between two different kinds of anger. Street anger and nursery anger, I want to call them. Street anger, you're walking down the road and somebody's behaving in an aggressive fashion. You know, get away from my girlfriend, or get out of my way, or something like that. And our response to that is appropriately a kind of fight-flight response. We do get out of their way, generally speaking. Then put yourself in the situation, and so the message that's being sent out by that person through their street anger is go away or get out of my way. Let's now go to the nursery. An infant that's been crying, maybe because it's hungry or wet or uncomfortable, nobody's responded, and now it's crying in an angry fashion. It's roaring with what you can only describe as rage. Now, we wouldn't want our response to that to be fight or flight, would we? That would end up with somebody making a notification about child abuse. What we recognise is that there's a different message from that infant in the nursery. If that infant could speak in mature adult language, it would say to us something like, look, I cried politely to tell you that I was hungry, and you didn't give me any attention, and now I'm completely overwhelmed by feelings that I can't possibly manage. This is an emergency. I need you here right now to make things right for me. And so the response that we have to anger in the nursery is to run in and help, to intervene in a positive way. And learning to do